song right here reflects heartfelt passion, devotion, energy, success, aggression, and art. Brought to you by Alicia Keys and Hillfella. Doesn't mean anything remix.
And the GSM Association, that for every 10% increase in broadband penetration in developing countries, there's a commensurate 1.3% increase in GDP, which is quite substantial. So providing countrywide demand-driven ICT services at reliable broadband speeds and at affordable prices will positively impact several of the pillars by which our global competitiveness is judged. As you know, Mr. President has just launched or inaugurated the Competitiveness Council. And if you know the WEF, World Economic Forum Competitiveness Council, they grade countries based on how attractive you are for foreign direct investment. So despite the fact we have attracted a lot of foreign direct investments in the country today, we're still actually quite weak along many of the pillars of global competitiveness. The strength of our institutions, specifically the way our government services support improved business performance. Our communications infrastructure is one of the pillars for competitiveness, and it looks at the number of mobile phone subscriptions and the number of fixed lines, the quality of our higher education and training, the efficiency of our goods markets, our financial market development, the technological readiness of our workforce, particularly in the way that we adapt work processes to get the most out of improved technology, our general business sophistication and innovation. Now, I just mentioned a few of the pillars in the Global Competitiveness Index, and what you will see from these is that with every single one of them, broadband is a key success factor. So it just goes to show how important this is. Unfortunately, and I'm sure you had this discussion yesterday, our penetration is really just about between 6 and 10%, depending on who you speak to or how it's been, or how broadband is being defined, the speed at which we're defining broadband. So between 6 and 10%, which is really still quite low if we're trying to achieve all of these things. But attaining the benefits that I mentioned earlier really will require not only industry collaboration, I think we're getting that to a certain extent, but it requires significant investments both in time and in resources to improve broadband penetration in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. Engineer were to ask me, what did I want to speak about, and I chose the topic. I see I'm the only one that has a topic out of everybody, but I chose the topic which was, it was about a commitment to growing and funding ubiquitous broadband access, and that's really what I want to talk about. And how does government demonstrate this commitment? As you know, this industry was liberalized, and we've just met or we've heard about the architects of the liberalization, and so government's role and participation was limited to policy formulation, direction, providing the required legal and regulatory framework to create an enabling environment for competition and for investment. Since 2001, we've had about over $25 billion has been invested into the telecoms industry. And so with that number, we have a healthy number of participants in the industry. I think that you can agree with me that we've performed this role fairly well. But when you look at the low broadband penetration rates, the high cost of access that we're faced with today, it tells me, and I'm sure it says to you as well, that significant work still needs to be done and significant investments still remain to be made in developing this infrastructure. And I think to compound that, the landscape has changed since the early days of liberalization. The competitive landscape has changed, and I think that's one of the reasons that is driving the NCC's approach to open access. The technology continues to evolve as we move from 2G to 3G networks to 4G to LTE. And the consumers, very importantly, the consumers are getting much more demanding for bandwidth. Funke mentioned Iroko partners. Nigerians, Nollywood is one of our biggest exports. But the interesting thing is that I think when you look at the Nollywood, people that actually are watching films that Iroko puts out on the internet, they're not actually Nigerians in Nigeria, they're Nigerians in the diaspora and other individuals, because we just don't have the bandwidth to watch a film. If you ever tried watching a film with the broadband speeds that we have here, it can be very frustrating. So consumers getting more demanding, industry priorities for the infrastructure are now much more focused on broadband deployment, and this raises new challenges for the network operators, the infrastructure providers, and of course the regulator. So government has to be continually alive to her responsibilities in developing the appropriate policies, legal and regulatory framework to attract the necessary domestic and foreign direct investment to follow the data and the internet revolution that we now need. We've talked about a telecoms revolution. I think we need to be architecting a data revolution that will deploy that broadband access very, very quickly. With the leadership and support of His Excellency, the Vice President, Architect Namadi Sambo, as Chairman of the National Economic Council, which is the council of the state governors that is chaired by the Vice President, we have commenced the engagement of stakeholders. Let's negotiate what it should be. At the beginning of the year, we'll pay you a certain amount of money and we will commit. And with all the network operators, with all the providers, we'll dig only once. We won't come and dig, Glo will dig, Airtel will dig, MCM will dig. So it's a pay once and dig once philosophy that we're trying to put forward to the state governors. Third is the abolition of all incidents of multiple and illegitimate taxation at the state and local government level. Fourth, acceleration of the processing period for obtaining approvals for the deployment of ICT infrastructure. So at the federal level, what we've said is that it would take you 30 days for applying for right-of-way to actually procurement. And we need to do that at the state levels as well. Because if we're trying to speed up this infrastructure rollout, we must get the approvals as quickly as possible. And of course, there's significant reductions in the right-of-way. And today we have some state governments charging as much as 8-9 million naira for every kilometer. At the federal level, we've brought this down to 145,000. We do realize that we cannot do this in all the states, but so we're negotiating with the states to see what makes sense at the state level. It's not going to be 145,000 naira, but we need to do something that actually makes sense and creates that incentive for people to actually build that infrastructure, because people will not build. If you have to spend 8 billion naira to roll out 100 kilometers of fiber and you haven't even dug the road yet, I can promise you that there's no foreign investor, there's no domestic investor that will make that investment, because how are you going to make your money back? If before you do anything, you've already paid $1 billion. So we're very confident that these negotiations will yield fruit, and we hope that we can announce them once we have hopefully our final meetings with the governors in a few weeks' time.
So right here reflects heartfelt passion, devotion, energy, success, aggression, and art. Brought to you by Alicia Keys and her fella. Doesn't mean anything remix. Let's go. It doesn't mean a thing, cars, clothes, and jewels. Without a woman's worth, it's just me and you. Don't ever fade, don't take your love away. AV, place me, same level as him. That's God, that's why resemblance is him. Remembrance convinced, living in innocence, picturing elegance, giving the best intent. I must preform, showing growth in songs, from having everything to losing all at once. To have